Inject my IV with an air bubble. If you want me dead, then pull the trigger.
I guess I didn't want you dead.
Okay, this is a huge glaring error. If injecting a bubble that size would kill a patient, then nobody would make it out of hospital. Very excited to be reacting to The Tyrant, Season 6, Episode 4 of House MD, requested by many of you, including Amar Begic, who's our second ever channel member. Thank you so much for your support. Let's see if I can get the diagnosis before House does as a doctor working in the UK.
Get on the ground! Discernment process! You box a big suit! Crimes against humanity! The torture!
Mr. President!
Ooh, can we just take a moment to appreciate the production value of this scene? The rain, the bodyguard, the van, the camera quality, even the blood. It was all superb. What was less superb is that our man is vomiting up blood. Even though he sounds like a dictator, he needs treatment fast. This is one of the medical emergency that needs to be acted on immediately. If I saw this, I would be arranging an endoscopy within 4 hours and doing some blood tests, because if a bleeding point in the stomach stays there, then it can be game over very quickly. I once had a patient when I was on gastroenterology who was an alcoholic, vomiting up blood like this and losing it so quickly that we needed to put a line in on each of his limbs to be able to resuscitate him fast enough to replace all the blood that he was losing. Luckily, he managed to get to theatre. I have no idea how this patient survived. The usual causes here could be a gastric or duodenal ulcer, vascular abnormality, Mallory-Weiss tear, esophageal, or even gastric cancer. More spicy house level things though could be radiation exposure, poison, hemorrhagic fever, maybe a posterior nosebleed, Boerhaave syndrome, which is esophageal perforation. But we need more clues. Let's find out.
Just ran into 13 while she was clearing out her locker. My condolences. Although, it's not like she's the hottest woman in the world.
We haven't broken up. You get your license back?
Not for a month or so.
House lost his license. Foreman is the boss. Cameron and Chase are back. This is insane. I can't wait to watch all the episodes before this to find out exactly why it all happened. Not only is Foreman the boss, but he also fired his girlfriend, 13, because she was underperforming. If your relationship survives that, it can survive anything. It reminds me of when I was in uni and I owned a 5-bedroom house while renting it out to some of my friends. One morning I walked downstairs, thought there was quite a cold breeze on the stairs. As I walked into the kitchen, I realized one of my friends had smashed a window with a potato. It's quite funny now when I look back, but at the time I wasn't impressed, especially after he had just thrown a Hoover down the stairs, broken it, as well as smashed a paving slab with a hammer. So I had to kick him out. Now he's one of my best friends. Sometimes you have to bite the bullet when someone isn't pulling their weight in the hope they will redirect things to a better place. Now back to our program.
Dwell thinks it was an assassination attempt.
Poison fits better because of the vomiting. Bug bite might not be a bite. It might be the start of chloracne.
Assassination attempt through dioxin poisoning.
Start him on Alestra.
Oh, dioxin poison is very interesting. You see, it is known as another name called Agent Orange, and the USA used this as a toxin against the Vietnamese people during the war, dropped 84 million liters of this defoliant there with the intent that it could kill many of the plants and affect the Vietnamese people's food supply. It's actually gotten down into the water, and even decades after the war, Vietnamese people, minimum of 3 million, are still affected by dioxin poisoning. It can cause problems with so many body systems, including cancer of the liver, the lungs, the kidneys, the intestines, bone marrow, can cause chloracne, leukemia, neuropsychiatric complications. It does this by damaging the DNA of the body. How does dioxin cause all these complications? Well, to get to the DNA, it has to penetrate through the nucleus, which is usually got protective mechanisms that stop foreign substances from getting in. But dioxin binds with something called the AH receptor in the cytoplasm of the cell. which allows it to enter the nucleus as the body starts to detect it as a native chemical, where it can begin causing damage to the body's DNA. Alestra, the treatment Foreman mentioned, is not your average treatment. It's a food additive, fat substitute that adds no calories to products. Since dioxin is highly lipophilic, Alestra carries it out of the body, letting it dissolve without being absorbed.
You must not treat him. Dybala killed my wife. She was a trade unionist. There are 2 million Sitibi. He's planning to massacre them all.
There is a huge conflict here for the doctors. By curing one person, you could potentially kill 2 million. That's a very tough situation to be in, since the 4 ethical principles that guide doctors are at conflict with each other. They are beneficence, which is always to act in the interests of your patients. Non-maleficence, which do no harm. Justice, which do what is right for not just the patient but also for society. And autonomy, which is that your patient has the right to choose. Do you see how hard it is to act in the best interest of the patient when it can harm other people? That being said, in this case, we would really be forced to treat the patient. However, if we discover essential information during the course of treatment that could put other people at harm, then we have a responsibility to disclose it to the appropriate authority. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I've had a situation where I had to treat a man who's been previously convicted of abusing children, and it didn't feel right, but it actually was the right thing to do. Very, very tough situation.
My downstairs neighbor, after you moved in, started complaining about the extra noise and the cooking smells.
Patient's having a heart attack.
Musket 15 litres.
Just thought you'd like to know.
Streptokinase, heparin.
Streptokinase, heparin. This is where we figure out that Tace is a quarter Sitibi, because he's trying to kill the patient. Streptokinase is like a grenade for coagulation factors, causing clots to dissolve. But if you have a bleeding point, it will cause that to hose blood. That's why one of the contraindications is a recent GI bleed, which this patient clearly had in the opening scene. In case that's not enough, he's adding heparin to thin the blood even more. Interesting, we rarely use streptokinase anymore. If someone has a heart attack that severe, ultimately they need to go to the cath lab so that the offending area can be ballooned and stented.
Lassa fever.
There's no Lassa in Dybala's country. The rash is gone. It rules out your dioxin theory.
The Egypt visit was for the African Union meeting, where I'm guessing he was meeting people from Africa.
Oh, nice. So House thinks that even though Lassa fever is not endemic to Dybala's country, he could have been exposed because of Liberian agents bringing it over from Egypt. That's one hell of a diagnosis. Foreman believed it and starting an antiviral called ribavirin. I think it's unlikely to be Lassa though. Wouldn't cause vomiting up blood, especially not like how we saw. So what are the other possibilities? The symptoms we have, including new ones, include things like vomiting up blood, heart and lung ulcers, and fever. Vasculitis like granulomatosis with polyangiitis comes to mind. Also could be bacterial endocarditis or sarcoidosis. I definitely want to do a blood screen including cultures, autoantibodies, serum ACE, check all his skin for unusual rashes and do an echo. For you clever people, here's a question. If it is vasculitis like granulomatosis with polyangiitis, then what organ would we expect to be affected next? Put your answers down below.
I got a call from Douglas's department at Princeton General. They want me to interview with them.
Douglas owes me a favor.
So about dinner, I'm free tomorrow night.
Step aside Romeo and Juliet. There is a new romance in town. What could be more romantic than calling in a favor to get a job for the girlfriend that you just fired? I love this series. Speaking of series, if you have a series or episode in mind that you would like me to react to, check out the channel membership so I can prioritize your request. To do that, press the join button down below. There are currently only 6 spots in the Hall of Fame, which will carve the names of the first 10 to join the channel in the history books. Grab them before they're gone, and the earlier you join, the faster I can react to your episode choice. Just like I'm reacting to this one from Amar Begic's request. Back to our program.
We'd like you to use her blood. She recovered from Lassa fever 2 years ago.
No,
I am Sitibi. Please let me give the blood.
I'd rather have a needle prick on my conscience than the death of her family members.
Ooh, they're put in such a tough situation here, but what can you do when you're being asked by them? It's the lesser of two evils, isn't it? The therapeutic method that they're talking about here is called convalescent plasma. It uses the blood of someone who's recovered from an infection because it, in theory, contains the right immune cells to recognize and clear the virus much quicker. The evidence shows that for this to work for Lassa fever, the virus of the donor has to have been a similar match to the one the recipient is actually fighting. Even then, evidence is fairly weak. It was initially thought it could be a good treatment for COVID as well, but the studies had a different opinion. Something I noticed and find interesting is that the cast are very vague about where Dibala, the tyrant, is actually from. There are some references to Nigeria, but whenever it's natural to say the country name, they just say Dibala's country instead. It might be to remain politically correct, but also realistic by not making up a country and calling it Mesherland or something.
Hey! Don't let him in there!
That's enough, we got him! Hey, who is that man?
Ooh, have you noticed that Chase is always the first one there when trouble happens? Like spearing people on rooftops, running after assassins. It's almost like he got his name for a reason. Even more excitingly, we have a new symptom. His eye is red. It could just be conjunctivitis, or it could be episcleritis or uveitis, which along with his other condition could indicate, I can't believe I'm going to say it, lupus? Is it lupus? Please be lupus. Double-stranded DNA antibodies test, please.
Did you get the biopsy results?
Yes, I just told you.
Is it lymphoma?
His memory is getting bad. That could be due to something called lupus fog. We have poor explanations for why this might happen, but up to 40% with systemic lupus erythematosus can have these symptoms. What we know more about is lupus itself, which is a complex multi-system autoimmune disease. It affects the brain, heart, lungs, skin, kidneys, and blood. As with many autoimmune diseases, there's a genetic predisposition and an environmental trigger that causes the immune system to become overactive. Treatments are with immunosuppression such as hydroxychloroquine or steroids. Hoping House does give some soon.
We're treating him for blasto. Start him with amphotericin B.
Inject my IV with an air bubble. If you want me dead, then pull the trigger.
I guess I didn't want you dead.
Okay, this is a huge glaring error. If injecting a bubble that size would kill a patient, then nobody would make it out of hospital. The minimum needed to cause harm is going to be at least 0.25 mils, which is a lot more than the tiny bubble that she had in that syringe. They said she was holding the gun to make a decision, but it was more like a toy gun loaded with flowers. That being said, I do find it interesting that they tempted her with that. You know, they're showing that she's questioning the ethics here and whether or not she should actually be treating him, even though they're continuing to do so. What they're treating for is a fungus called blastomycosis dermatitis. Since the Ebola had possibly some skin manifestations, and then the second phase could be a whole body manifestation, it can cause lung pathology, brain abscesses, fungal arthritis. Treatment is with antifungals like ketoconazole or fluconazole. Prognosis is usually good. I'd say this or House's suggestion of scleroderma though are maybe a little too simple or straightforward to be right. Come on, Lupus. You gotta come through.
Positive for anti-centromere antibodies.
This only points to scleroderma, doesn't prove it.
You mess this up, our patient dies.
Switch him to steroids.
Okay, I'm getting very excited now. Anti-centromere antibodies are frequently positive in lupus, and it should be responsive to steroids. Moment of truth coming up. Interesting what she said to Foreman though. Many of us don't admit we're wrong and end up irrationally defending a position that we don't agree with just to stick to our guns. That can be seen as an immature coping mechanism and lead to disagreements and arguments. This is part of the reason why therapy is helpful for everyone, not just people with mental health conditions. The fact Foreman was able to change his mind after Cameron brought that to his attention shows how much he's matured as a character. I do really like Foreman. I think he's very, very smart doctor and the right leader for this team now.
Hi, honey. Your arm is back. Now clench both your fists. Now let go.
For 36 years I've been in pain, and it's finally gone.
House never fails to surprise me with his little schemes that he comes up with. He's got the desire for mischief as a toddler, the capacity for goodwill as Mother Teresa, and the brain power of Einstein all rolled up into one. No wonder we keep watching. The mirror box for phantom limb pain is a genuine treatment, and it works by tricking the brain into thinking that the amputated limb is moving using that technique. This allows you to have perceived control of relaxing the area, leading to huge amounts of pain control. It was initially developed to treat amputees as a victim of war and worked better than any analgesia could. They're trying to use it for other conditions like complex regional pain syndrome and strokes as well. But for reasons unknown, it seems to only work in the upper limbs and not the lower. Now, this war veteran was about to kick House out of Wilson's apartment, but I bet he'll think twice about it now that he's cured his pain.
O2 sats down to 88.
Going through the mainstem bronchus into the right upper lobe.
Get the paddles. Hold on. There's a third.
God, there's a dozen.
Shock him.
Oh man, this isn't good. Multiple bleeders in the lungs. Looks like he's not going to survive this. Maybe that's for the best though, since he's about to massacre an entire population. I'm quite impressed that they went through the trouble of animating the lungs and getting bleeding points, to be honest. The lungs looked quite realistic with the cartilaginous rings, and the bleeders were a little bit too gloopy to be fresh, real blood, especially when it's actively bleeding and isn't clotted. In all fairness, the situation here did resemble more closely what would happen in real life, except the fact that his rhythm wasn't actually shockable, yet they still shocked, and they did no chest compressions or oxygen or gave adrenaline. What I mean about how realistic it is then is about what percentages of CPR patients survive. If someone has a cardiac arrest out of hospital, only 7 to 8 out of 100 actually survive. And in a hospital, you'd think it'd be way higher, but it's actually only 15 out of 100. So that is double, but if you look at medical dramas, you'd expect that you'd bring back at least 90% of them. That has a real impact on our job though for some people, as attempting CPR isn't the right thing for everyone. So I remember a patient who had terminal pancreatic cancer, who was frail, bedbound, suffering, had very little quality of life, and the family did not agree to a do not resuscitate form. Now, even if that patient had a cardiac arrest and we brought them back to life, the chest compressions would break a few ribs and there would be a long stay intensive care needed, which would not be appropriate and would worsen any pain and what little quality of life they actually had. That case in particular had to be escalated to the lawyers, but ultimately it is a medical decision on whether it's appropriate to do CPR or not. It's a really tough decision, but now we still need to know what actually killed this patient. Looks like he's not going to survive it.
Switched his meds. Thought I was wrong, so I took him off the antifungals. It was too late. I was right in the first place.
If you're anything like me, and by the way you are, you need to know which.
I love the character development here. Foreman is just being trained to be the next generation House, and the uncertainty of the diagnosis is like House v Foreman battle. Who will win? Who was right? If it is fungal, then Foreman has earned his seat as new king clinician. If scleroderma, then House takes over. And if it's lupus, then I knock on both sides and get my own TV show. Let's find out.
He's under lock and key in the morgue. His government wants their own doctors to do the autopsy. It's a sign-in sheet from the morgue. Your signature, 9:45 this morning. It's right before you guys ran the test.
Usually, these episodes tend to round things off right at the end. That tells me the fact that Chase was in the morgue right before he ran the test means something fishy was going on. Did he never run the test and just forged the results? Did he book Dybala's spot in the mortuary because they knew they were going to kill him? Did he pick up some kind of infectious disease from an isolated body in the morgue and give it to Dybala? I'm not sure, but either way, there is a smell in the air, and it ain't roses.
What were you doing there? One of the patients in the morgue was a 70-year-old woman who had scleroderma.
He's going to kill the Satibi. Every last one of them.
What? Oh my god. So Chase, the guy who's usually putting his life on the line to save patients, now faked that Dybala had scleroderma on the test with a different patient's blood results. That is crazy. You may be wondering how you can draw blood from a dead person. Well, the blood actually stays usable for weeks if the body's left in the right cold conditions, and that is how pathologists can run many tests on autopsy. What would Chase's crime be classed as here? Is it murder? Is it grievous bodily harm? Is it fraud? That means the patient probably did have the fungal infection Foreman was talking about. He was on the right treatment for blastomycosis, and steroids made things worse. Is that murder? Let me know your opinion down below. I'm curious.
Every life we've saved, it would have meant nothing if we just sent him off to kill hundreds of thousands of people. You tell the world that I faked this test, Dybala becomes a martyr.
Foreman really has a tough choice here. Sell out his friend who has committed one of the worst crimes for a noble reason, or dob him in and risk millions of people's lives as Dybala's ideology becomes entrenched. This is what I love about House. It challenges the idea of good and bad and blurs the lines to show what immediately might seem like a bad thing, like Foreman firing his girlfriend, could make them closer. I don't know what I would do in that situation, but this story reminds me of the parable of the Chinese farmer. A long time ago, a Chinese farmer lost a horse. The villagers came to him the next day and said, "That's really unfortunate." The Chinese farmer said, "Maybe." The day after, when he woke up, that horse had brought back 6 others to his farm. The villagers went up to him and said, "You're so fortunate." The Chinese farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, his son rode on one of the new horses, fell down and broke his ankle. The villagers went to him and said, "Oh, that is a really unlucky event." He said, "Maybe." The next day, the conscripts for the army actually came around and they didn't take his son for duty because of his broken leg. The villagers went to the farmer again and said, "That is the most fortunate thing that has ever happened in this village." And the Chinese farmer said, "Maybe." And this Taoist ideology basically says that we shouldn't be too attached of certain outcomes as they happen, as we don't know later on what that might lead to, and as such we should just enjoy the moment and whatever it brings to us. This episode is incredible. I mean, what a twist at the end. So everything in the ethics book tells me that him burning the evidence is wrong. And yet, why am I so happy to see those flames running up from that paper? He looks after his own. Foreman really is becoming House, except without the walking stick and occasional sexual harassment. Huge shout out to Mediated Mike, who got the most animals starting with the letter B. I was particularly impressed with Banjo Catfish. I didn't expect something like that existed. Now it's my turn to diagnose you. It seems like you have a House reaction deficiency. Oh look, the cure is popping up just there. Treat yourself. Stay curious. I'm Sam.